Okay, good evening, everybody. This is the March 6th, 2025 meeting of the planning board. With me, I'm Mike Capuano. I'm the chair of the planning board. With me tonight is our vice chair, Amelia Aboff, our clerk, Jahan Habib, and our members, Lynn Richards, Michael McNeely, and Luke Schuster. We have a quorum for the items that can be before the board tonight. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the planning board is conducted by a remote participation. A video recording will be available on the city's website or by emailing planning@somervillema.gov. This meeting is being recorded. As a reminder to the members of the public who are in attendance, if you want to share a comment, public testimony, please state your name, street of residence, and city of residence for the record at the beginning of your testimony. I don't believe we're going to be opening up testimony tonight. That is always a good disclaimer to have. So, one more announcement. Sorry, everybody. The planning board has an open seat for an alternate member and is seeking applicants. If you have a background in urban planning, real estate development, architecture, design, or other related professions. I read other related professions of, do you love Somerville and want to be involved in what we look like? Do you have a passion for guiding Somerville's growth? Please send a resume and a cover letter to planning@somervillema.gov. So we have minutes that will be approved hopefully tonight, February 6, 2025. Has everybody had an opportunity to review the minutes? Does anybody have any comments, questions, suggested revisions? Seeing none, the chair moves to adopt the draft meeting minutes of February 6, 2025 as the final minutes, seconded by Amelia. Steve, can you please call the roll?
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Lynn Richards,
Aye.
Luke Schuster,
Aye.
Amelia Ava,
Aye.
and Michael Capuano.
Aye, we have meeting minutes. By the way, I just looked at my camera and I realized I'm calling in from outer space here. It looks like Jesus. I'm sorry, guys. What I'm going to do first is take up. So we have two items on our actual agenda, and then an item of other business. So the first item on our agenda that I'd like to pick up is the recommendation to the Land Use Committee on the proposed zoning amendment that we had a joint hearing on a few weeks ago. So I'd like to bring that up first. Does anybody, I see Amelia.
Mr. Chair, I'm recused from discussion of this item, so please let me know when I should return to the meeting.
Yep, I will text you as soon as we're done.
Thank you so much.
Okay, for the record, Amelia is now absent from the meeting because she's recused. Does anybody have any comments or questions that they'd like to raise about this particular agenda item? We've received both oral testimony and written testimony, as well as presentations. So happy to engage in some discussion if you'd like. Okay. I don't see anybody who wants to raise their hand. I will just say that this is something that seems to make sense to me. It's received positive comments from the public. I'm supportive of it generally, and so what I'd like to do is make a recommendation that the planning board recommend adoption of this particular proposed zoning amendment to the Land Use Committee, seconded by John. Steve, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Sorry, I was muted. Jahan Habib.
That's okay.
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Lynn Richards,
Aye.
Luke Schuster,
Aye.
and Michael Capuano.
Aye. Okay, that item is now recommended formally to the Land Use Committee for adoption. I'm going to text Amelia right now and ask her to rejoin. And in the interim, can we please have the applicant and team and council for Comment Street. The unmuted screens shared and all that good stuff.
Sure, this is Steve Carey. I'm promoting Anthony Galuccio. Anthony, if there's other folks from your team that I should promote to panelist. Hi, Anthony. If there's anyone else I should be promoting to panelist, let me know and I will promote them.
Yeah, so Erica Johnson, she's controlling the
Great.
slides. Peter Patsoris, Mike Giordano, Darren Beard, and Christina Ardette.
Great.
For
I just
now.
don't see Michael.
Yeah, he may not. So Peter's fine, and then we can call on folks as needed if we get into detail.
Great.
And by the way, for the record, Amelia is back.
Good. Mr. Chair, should we proceed?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good to see everyone again. It's been a few weeks. I'll have Erica just start. We don't have a long presentation. We think we've covered really the bulk of the topics through the several comprehensive meetings we've had. But I was excited to bring what I think will be good news, and hopefully you all have reviewed it. We took some time to go back and look at the program, tried to resolve more holistically the big issues that were raised with respect to heights and parking, which seemed to be the two items that kept coming up over and over. So we took some time to take a hard look at program. You can go to the next slide, Erica. And we've pleased to submit revisions to both buildings, and thank you all for each of you for your comments. They will each be etched in stone. It was a great and robust discourse throughout this. So I'm not going to go back and cover all your comments, but specifically with respect to height, a few of the members had concerns about this, and we got specific direction to at least take a floor off. We were able to offer a reduction of 3 floors on 23 Cummings. That represents about 105,000 square feet. We talked about just dealing with overall density as a way of dealing with traffic issues as well. And we were able to take a floor off 20 Cummings, which floor plates are about 35,000. So that's the math on that. We've spent a decent amount of time on shadow studies. So I did want to just show the shadow impacts of the reductions. Through you, Mr. Chair, the pink is the reduced shadow impact. So that's and as we've talked a lot about, the biggest impact is at 9 o'clock during the spring solstice, and then that shadow moves around during the morning and is pretty much off the neighborhood completely by noon, but it moves across the lower part. So we are able to impact that worst condition with this move. 20 has less impact because it's further away, and obviously there's existing. So this just shows that, again, what is the most impactful shadow impact at the spring solstice. We'll move to next one. So obviously summer, sun's very high. This gets us pretty much off the neighborhood completely at 9 a.m. and then no impacts after that. And then to next one, September. Again, the pink shows the reduced impact, nothing at noon. And during the day, it's just at 9 a.m. And then winter It's how we felt for the last 3 months, pretty miserable just about everywhere. It's the biggest impact,
Can
but
I,
that,
can I ask you a question? I'm looking
yeah.
at 9 a.m. on December 21st when everybody's looking to, run into the darkness. I don't see an I don't see an end to that shadow at 9 a.m. In that neighborhood.
Yeah, I don't know. It went off the grid. Although Peter, maybe I didn't even notice that, Mr. Chair. I'm assuming the pink starts beyond that line.
Wasn't Long Dark Shadow a Led Zeppelin tune, or am I getting it wrong?
Oh,
That seems
I've given up on the winter, but yeah, you have better eyes than I kind of had given up, but I'm assuming there's about a similar reduction at the top of that queue.
okay.
All right, so that's that. Next slide. If there is any, it's Erica, is that it? Yeah, so essentially, and we also offered a reduction in the parking. There's been a lot of conversation about that, and it's confusing, because one of the conditions is that all the garages be open and public. So you're talking about a ratio, but essentially all the garages are open to everybody. So it's a little bit of a weird way to analyze it, but we agreed to reduce that valet number. In the past, we talked about a utilization analysis, and which could be complicated. So what we did was offer to reduce the parking so that the ratio stays the same. I didn't want to do a bait and switch and lower the height and reduce the FAR, but keep the same parking, because I thought that would may not be viewed as reasonable would be if we also offered a reduction so that the ratio doesn't get worse. And so it's taken a long time to get here, and it's been difficult because, as we've said, we're competing with other communities that have other ratios, but we want to get this done. And I'm hopeful, Mr. Chair, that at some point we reach a point where all the disparate owners in Assembly can get together and really get down to promoting Assembly as a destination. So when hopefully this market resets, we can attract life sciences to Assembly, which is going to be the big challenge. But that's really all I have. I did want to also just mention, just because I have to sign off, if we are able to conclude, we did have, I believe, agreement from planning. We got an email response, just that because there is disparate ownership, joint ownership of the parcels, we have to make sure that there's equitable opportunity between the owners, meaning if a tenant does come along, we want to present both parcels as equally ready. It's just making sure that both parties feel like they're being treated fairly. So planning was great in saying that if the order of the project changes, we could change which parcel goes first by way of staff approval, which is really important. We never sort of got to that because we were focused on height and parking, but planning Dan did confirm that they were good with that. And lastly, we've agreed to an economic development covenant. We're in final draft. And a lot of the good stuff that people have raised, things that Lynn raised at the first meeting, a lot of the infrastructure improvements are wrapped into that, so that we're making improvements and then we get credited against the large project infrastructure fund. So we think everybody's happy on that as well.
Okay. Let me ask you this. So we talked about kind of my concern, which was shadows. I'm not sure we're quite there yet, but maybe we can make it work. The other concern that was raised by mobility was some of the parking issues, right, and the valet. And you indicated that you reduced the valet numbers, and I didn't see a slide on it, but I think it went from 190 to 95 or something like that.
Yeah, no, so we reduced it by 100, and essentially.
Yep.
It essentially keeps the 0.65, which may be the end of my permanent career, because I'm not sure it's a functional number, but we're looking to get this done. It keeps it at a 0.65, Mr. Chair, in light of the square footage reduction. The overall square footage reduction is about 140,000 square feet of commercial that goes away. So this has been a long process. I didn't want to push the client to reduce height. And then you say, well, your parking ratio just went up, and now I'm in the same fight, and it feels like quicksand. So I pushed to have 100 of those valet spaces reduced. So it stays at a 0.65.
So I appreciate that quite a bit. So I know that wasn't necessarily my concern. That was more of a concern of the mobility division, as I recall. My concern was more of the height, more of the shadow issues.
No, that's why we were aggressive particularly with 23.
Yep. So what I'd like to do, I think we have a representative from mobility who might be in attendance. Am I still right in saying that, Steve?
Yep, that's correct. I just promoted Justin Schreiber actually to panelist.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so just I'd just love to hear kind of Justin's view. And somebody's got background noise that they can mute themselves.
Good evening, Jared. My Zoom was just rejoining. If you don't mind, just repeating the question.
I was going to ask for your division's assessment of the significantly reduced amount of valet spaces. They reduced by 100, which I think is 50% or more. So
yeah, so I think we're very, very close. You'll see our recommended conditions is per building a 0.7. I think maybe there's about 50 spaces between what we're recommending and what the applicant's proposing. With the height reduction, it's like Mr. Galuccio said, it's the same parking ratio, so it's sort of the same auto intensity, but it's definitely a lower intensity use of the site overall because there's less parking. We are really looking at it as the first two buildings and the ratio of those two buildings, because those are the buildings that the garages are associated with. So that, phases 1 and 2 can be built, and the applicant will have access to the entire parking supply in those garages. And our feeling is that we would like to see 0.7 in each of those buildings. And, at that time, if they, in proceeding with phase 3, if they would like to park more using the valet, we think it's appropriate that they come back to the board and ask for that permission rather than giving it up front. And again, our recommendation doesn't change the structure capacity of the garage. It lowers the valet a little bit more than was proposed. And I think it allows for the first two phases to proceed, and we can see where we're at. And rather than sort of approving an amount of parking we think may be a little too much for the site. But we're, overall, because of the reduced size of the buildings, we're not that far apart. And, I will point out that the ratio that we're recommending is identical to Greystar's property at 74 Middlesex Ave. So we're trying to be, equitable across the different buildings in this area.
Mr. Chair, Justin, you can call me Anthony. I think we're on a first name basis by now. The 74 is actually higher because they didn't build as much as their permit allowed, which doesn't matter. I've tried every I don't think debating who has what is helpful. I think you folks have made it clear you're trying to reduce parking and traffic impacts. And so I don't want to go down. I'm just trying to get as close as possible so we can have an entitled project and move on to design review, because I'm more worried about, you know, the broader economic picture. I am absolutely fine, Mr. Chair, with one thing I do want to say. It's hard enough to have a ratio like this. It's really impossible to deal with tenants if we have to go back to the planning board at some point. It just becomes difficult to compete with other properties that can say, here's the building, here's the build form, here's the square footage, and here's the parking. We're going to be lower on parking, but I can't have something where that is in flux. I am happy to say, and Justin, I think it's a great point, and I hadn't thought of it in terms of, you know, I think it's a great catch that if whatever building goes first, you don't want them to be leasing out at a 1.2 for 10 years because the second building doesn't go. We're completely fine with a condition that says that we cannot go over a 0.7 for the first building. And I think you're right. I think we're actually, there may be a little bit of math disconnect, but I think our goal was to try to get there, but that we're fine with that as a condition. And I sort of expected that, and I think it's a good catch.
So I'll kind of say this, the way I'm looking at it is I know we have discussed, and I expect that we will be seeing a, you know, regional parking plan, a regional plan or a district plan for the Assembly Square neighborhood. I don't think 50 spots are going to make or break that plan. So, Justin, I respect where you guys are coming from. As one board member, I'm not willing to vote against these folks over 50 spots that might be met in a different place. And I also respect, you know, Anthony, your client's willingness to meet that condition that's a little bit more squishy than what you usually see. You know, I don't think I've seen a condition that you know, has somebody come back a few years later and assesses the parking issue. So that's kind of a first for me. I'm still not 100% sold on the height and the and the shadow impact. However, I do respect the fact that you and your client have done quite a bit to try to meet the concerns that the board has had and the city's had on a number of different issues. So I'd like to hear what some of my other colleagues have to say, but I very much appreciate where the project is right now. I'd love to solicit any comments from my colleagues. I see Luke.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have a mostly just a question to get my head back in the sequence of conversations we've had around the height issue. Does planning staff, I'd love to hear planning staff's feelings about the height. And if I recall correctly, they were comfortable with the initial heights. The concerns more that had been raised on our board side. But I just want to confirm that I'm recalling that right, just to get a sense of where planning staff is as one of the variables here.
Sure. Steve Carey here. I haven't been the case planner on this project. Our case planner for this actually just left the city. So I can't really state a official position of PPZ. I guess generally speaking, I'd point out that Assembly is in the transform district, transform area of the comprehensive plan, which does promote, transformative development in that way. But I don't think PPZ has, taken an official position on the height, and I don't want to speak out of turn.
Mr. Chair, could I respond to that?
Yeah, of course.
So I don't want to go back because I'm, praying we're in a better place tonight. And I have a lot of respect for all of you, and I've listened to you enough now to know you're all each in individual areas of expertise and on expertise of planning, particularly for Somerville. It's hard when these projects are now taking up to 2 years to go through even amendment processes, never mind new special permits. So I try to be very fluid and defensive when sort of things, what I say to folks, neighborhoods change, people's opinions change, and the longer you go, 1 minute open space is a huge priority, or density and height is something people really, really want, and they don't care as much about civic space. 2 years later, ask the same neighborhood, you might get different answers. When we started, it was across the board, including the Mystics, go as big as you can. We want life science. And as a reminder, we wanted bigger floor plates. And Sarah's been fantastic, Sarah Lewis. She didn't want us to go for variances for larger floor plates, which would have reduced height. She really wanted us to be compliant with the 35,000 square foot floor plates, which, as we've said in the past, and I'm way past argumentative, this is just observational. The FAR is really strong there because the plans have all shown, a really strong life science campus community in that area. But they left the provision in about the 120 height, which is bizarre to me because you'd never get to the FAR if you were anything close to that. So there's a little bit of an inconsistency there, but the assembly plan has buildings all at 300. And again, folks have been really encouraging of that. Planning staff, as I remember, were very supportive of both the density and the height. We wouldn't have gotten this far without, feeling as confident as we were. Most of the things we worked on were around pedestrian, ground plane. As you know, Mr. Chair, there was a big push in the middle of this to get cars off Cummings. So that never came up. And then we spent a year on that. So it was in height never came up. It was always about trying to reduce vehicular traffic on Cummings. And as you know, we resisted, but we agreed to allow Cummings to be potentially a one-way. So no, there was always support for that, for the height. It never came up until we got to the board. And I'm not that, again, I've been doing this for a long time and I changed my mind as an elected official. I don't think people don't have a right, especially the board who hasn't seen a project till when we arrive, that have a right to say, hey, take another look at this. So I don't use equity as an argument, but no, it was never an issue, Member Schuster.
See, Michael. And then
I was
Amelia.
raising
Sorry.
my hand for the vice chair, actually.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael. I just wanted to add some color from my perspective, Luke, to answer your question as a slightly longer term follower of the evolution of these things. And this is biased with my perspective, but here's where I think we are. The text of the zoning ordinance that Attorney Gluccio pointed out sort of kept it at 120 feet is from the zoning overhaul that was, I believe, December 2019. So that hasn't been updated, to the best of my memory, to reflect anything that was documented in the Assembly Square neighborhood plan, which was completed in the summer of 2022, and I believe never formally adopted for reasons that I can't recall right now, and Steve may be able to clarify for us. So we have, Steve, is that right?
That is right. Yes.
So we have these sort of dueling pieces of guidance. We have the ordinance as it was envisioned in 2019, at which point, and at the end of 2019, at which point I would strongly guess that work and data collection for the neighborhood plan was underway. I can't say that with certainty, but given the length of time these neighborhood plans typically take, I would say probably staff knew as we were finalizing that we were embarking on or in the early stages of that master plan process. Then we have a plan that had, I think, a fairly positive reception, and which was, I think, largely something we were aligned with and which the city still feels aligned with, that came out in 2022. And that plan did reflect heights in keeping with the heights originally proposed by the applicant in this part of Assembly. So from my perspective, I think the applicant has done has been made a good faith effort to respond to our concerns after coming in with a plan that was within the guidance of that neighborhood plan framework, and is making a reduction that sort of is responsive to the board's perspective here, which I, for one, will, voice a lot of appreciation for. It is also my perspective that the city may have erred in not really consulting with the Ten Hills neighborhood and engaging them sufficiently in the development of that plan that got us to the point that that plan includes heights of this extreme in the one part of Assembly that casts shadows on a residential neighborhood. And we heard from some of those residents during the process here, and that's part of where personally my sensitivity to the height issue comes in, because we have this guidance document, which I think was largely agreed upon, although never formally adopted, which may or may not have adequately taken into consideration the shadow impacts of what the massings entertained in that neighborhood plan would actually mean for the abutting neighborhood. And so the applicant's effort to be, within the framework of that plan feels appropriate to me, as does their concession to reduce those heights slightly in response to neighborhood concerns that may or may not have been sufficiently addressed by the city in that 2022 document. So that's a long and biased answer to your question, but that's where I feel that we are.
Would anybody else like to weigh in? I've kind of given mine. Luke, Michael, and Amelia, or at least, Luke and Amelia have. Michael has raised his hand in support of Amelia, and now he's raising his hand, I hope, in support of his own.
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I may have the floor for a brief moment. I share the general sentiment that I'm not too troubled by the height. As you have heard in previous discussions, I've tied height to the ratio problem, but otherwise I'm not overly concerned about the height. So I do appreciate that you guys have done some very serious thinking about the parking and trying to work around mobility's requests. So thank you for going through all that process, and thank you for proactively addressing the concern that as you lower height, your ratio actually is going to get out of whack. So thank you for doing the right thing there and kind of proactively jumping on board with that. Just so I can make sure I understand how this happened. Previously, I had asked for a little bit of creativity around being able to kind of rein in the parking issue should it start to get a little bit to where mobility was predicting it would get to. Basically allowing us to have a lever to navigate an area where the developer thinks that we really are going to be in one position, but we also have some data that's in the other position. And is it true that this request to come back to the board later is kind of in response to that ask for that lever to kind of pull the e-brake suddenly? Is that how we got to this recommendation? Maybe this is actually a question for mobility.
I think yes, because I guess we thought about the proposal, and personally, I think it's really fraught to try to design a study that could actually, the question was, could we do a study to determine if the valet parking, sort of the excess parking, was no longer necessary, right? A difficult, if not impossible, thing to study when that parking exists. It's a really, I think the idea of trying to haggle over terms of a study that could be a decade away from now just did not make a lot of sense to us. And given that we're talking about spaces that don't actually change the garage in any way, don't require a redesign, we're talking about the valet spaces that are added in. We felt it would just be much easier to allow a certain amount. The most we felt comfortable with, and we increased that number, and then felt that again, after when the two lab buildings have been built, the entire capacity is available, and there will be another site plan approval associated with the phase 3, and it made sense that at that time, if the additional 50 to 100 spaces were necessary, that they could be sought at that time, right? Because this could be, again, many years from now, when hopefully the mobility landscape has changed. We'll have tenants in those first two buildings. We'll actually know, are they able to meet the commitments that are in the mobility management plan? And rather than trying to guess what a future study could mean, we'll actually have real data to evaluate at that time. So that's where we landed on that as a recommendation.
Okay, that's helpful. So I might still be a little bit dense on what's happening here, but I definitely appreciate the sentiment of having this like ambiguous thing floating over the project that a approval might still be outstanding, and that causing a lot of issues, especially when it comes to leasing out the space. So I am at a high level a little bit concerned about that. So can the applicant maybe just talk me through a little bit where we're having a disconnect with mobility on this like later approval? It sounds like there already is going to be a requirement to talk to us again for that third phase. Is there a concern that that might not be the right time to ask for that additional parking?
Yeah, we haven't seen that. There is no condition that I've seen that says that. We're speaking to the conditions that have been presented to us, that we have been responding to, which was a 0.5 parking ratio. As you know, Mr. Chair, there was a sunset floated. So that was an idea that came up in discourse, but it's not a formal condition that was presented to us. You're right. I mean, I'm speaking to you because this is sort of the forum to have real world conversations about what's going on in the real world. And the ratio that we're agreeing to is not competitive. So it's a huge leap of faith. Michael, what I would say is we thought of the traffic mitigation as the check and balance, right? So when Luke, actually, member Schuster pointed it out, there's a real disconnect between what our consultants think is the worst case scenario and and it's not a small one. So I'm like a marriage counselor in this, and I don't understand why the two parties just, somebody likes sleeping and it's cold, the other one warm, and now I get it. So we have to figure out a middle temperature. Luke Schuster figured that out before I did. Way off in terms of, both have valid positions, I guess, but they're way off. So what I did as a non-traffic expert is to push the client to agree to traffic signals upon direction of the city. And mobility then said, well, if it's going to be bad, we want it only to be bad in one place, and we want it to be bad for your commercial tenants, not for the neighborhood. So we want to reserve the right to make Cummings a one-way. So I looked at those as the checks and balances on if the scenario were closer to what the city was afraid of than ours. We don't, our consultant doesn't think we're ever going to get there. So, but yes, the idea that we go to the bank for financing for a 500,000 square foot commercial building with parking in flux, it's just not an option. You have to, parking is such an essential piece of whether you're going to have rentable space. It wouldn't work. So I pushed to lower the permanent supply. And I would also note, I do think Freystad deserves a little bit of credit. They wanted to respect that 0.5 number, even though it's really a residential ratio. So the parking as constructed only holds a 0.5, which I think was an ode to, yeah, if we don't need the extra parking, we won't use it. We're not gonna. I go back to Sue Clippinger in Cambridge, which was, if you build it, you'll use it. Like, that was her philosophy for 30 years, and I hated it. But at her retirement, I shook her hand and said, you're right. So we tried to immediately sort of respect the 0.5 by not building a garage that would hold more, and the utilization of valet was out of respect to that number. But I don't want the infrastructure, the mitigation commitments to get lost here, because they were not agreed to at the beginning, and we moved a lot on that. We aligned it with what economic development was looking for additional money too. But yeah, I think the goal here tonight is to give and to have an entitlement that means what it says, so that we know what we have going forward. And a 0.65 with a 0.7 cap, I don't have any lab. I've never permitted a lab with that ratio. I think it's something to hold up in the air and be proud of, if that's where, if that's a priority for the city. But I couldn't agree to then, and by the way, we may not give you that ratio down the road. Like, that would make this impossible in my mind. It kind of defeats the purpose of what we've just advanced.
Just to be clear, that's not
Okay.
what we're suggesting.
All
I
right,
think
go ahead.
the suggestion is an entitlement of 0.7 per building 1, 0.7 for building 2.
I'm good. I'm going to say less than.
Okay, then again, I think I understand what's happening, but I want to make it super plain for everyone, the public included. So the recommendation for mobility is that we're going to do 0.7 for phases 1 and 2. What exactly is the phase 3 condition?
So there's no condition that envisions the scenario that I just described, but it would be an option that they amend their special permit to increase the valet capacity, right? So we're not addressing it in the memo itself. I'm just pointing out that would remain an option.
Okay.
And then there is, again, for clarity, there is one more condition right after those two recommended that requests the valet operations to cease basically December 31st, 2039, right? The eve of the Summer Vision 2040 goal. So that was in response. I think the sunset we proposed was more like 5 years last time. That's a little more than 14 years in response to the request for more certainty in a longer time period. So to be clear, those 28, 29, 30, those are the three conditions that relating to parking that we're proposing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you for clarifying. It's been I asked for an updated memo today. It's been very tough I'm still going off the original conditions, which a sunset was sort of I've been trying to engage in to really sit down face to face. The problem with a sunset is nobody is going to finance or lease based on, you're going to just, those spots come off the top. And I know Justin is trying, and he's been wonderful and civil and respectful. It's already 2025 based on sort of the process in Somerville, design review could be another year. It would take 3 years to get from there to occupancy. You're talking about that sunset is around the corner. And as we said at the beginning, a sunset is really not something we would support. I've been working on trying to reduce the permanent supply, not have things that might happen in the future. So that isn't something that we're supportive of.
So look, let me dig in there for a minute, right? So we've got the applicant team who's been willing to work with, maybe not to my full satisfaction on some of the shadow stuff and some of the height stuff, that notwithstanding, with the parking issue, right? You've moved to reduce it by 100 spaces, which is, I think, quite significant. You're willing to take a look in a few years of what's going on. This sunset issue, I've not dealt with as a member of the planning board. This is novel to me, and we're looking at a sunset provision somewhat in a vacuum, because what I'd like to see, and I think other members of this board would like to see, is a broader parking plan and mobility plan for the Assembly Square neighborhood in this area of the Assembly Square neighborhood that hasn't been built up as much. Where I think, as one member, I can't, I think in good faith, say no to this applicant over 50 spaces that can otherwise be addressed in other areas of how we look at how mobility works throughout Assembly and throughout this aspect in this area of Assembly. Because I don't necessarily want a good project to go away because we're concerned about 50 spots that may or may not go away in 15 years. I think, to me, that's a little silly. So I don't want to continue fighting about a potential sunset that the applicant's not happy about, that I've not seen as a member of this board, and I've been on this board for quite a many number of years. That's not something that we're familiar with, and I'm not sure how that's going to play with when we look at how mobility is going to work in a more global sense. So at this point, I don't know if there's going to be much benefit for the applicant and mobility to keep going back and forth, because I don't think at this point they're going to agree. I think it's going to be up to the board to have a discussion as to whether we think this is a good project or not, based on the positions that the city's put forward and the concessions that the applicant has made. So that's kind of where I'd like to have the discussion lead. And I'm hoping my fellow colleagues can weigh in on what they actually think this application with these proposed conditions are going to look like. Yeah, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While I continue to have concerns about the height / the shadow study, particularly in that slide that showed the winter solstice, December 21st, I do recognize that the applicant has made significant good faith efforts in both addressing the concerns that this board has raised, as well as working with mobility planning and other departments. I do think that this is a good project. I share your concerns about the sunset provision altogether. I'm also very much mindful of, the economics behind the project, and there may be additional challenges. Hopefully not, but for the applicant team. So overall, I would say I'm certainly in favor of it under the constraints that we're operating under. However, I do want to also note my concern for the Ten Hills neighborhood, which has been impacted, not just in this case, but in many other instances. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Appreciate that, John. And actually, before we move on, and maybe maybe mobility. I don't know if Justin's still there. Yes. I don't want a fulsome report, Justin. If you can give me any indication as to whether mobility is looking to give us some sort of a more global view of what you're looking at for the assembly district. I don't need it now. I'm just wondering, are we going to see it in a month, 3 months, 5 years? What's going on here? Do we know, and do you have the opportunity to present to us?
Yeah, I mean, I think broad brush, building as little parking as possible is the ultimate goal because that's the number one contributor that generates traffic. So there's a lot of detail in that, and like Anthony said, we need to figure out better ways to get the different parking operators to work together, so you don't have this, theoretically public system that's not, an even playing field because we have some incumbent operators that aren't subject to the same rules as others. So we're thinking about how we might make that happen, so that the different developers are on the same level field. And also just for clarity, the recommendation for 0.7 came before mobility was aware of the change in the massing. So, just to be clear, we're not haggling over 50 spaces. That was the recommendation, sort of regardless of the change in massing.
I respect that. Thank you. Thanks, John. Yeah.
Justin, I think this is more to you. So first, I agree with a lot of the comments Michael and others have said. I think this is a good project. I wish that the Ten Hills neighborhood had been pulled into the conversations earlier. I guess I also wish the city needs to own their contribution in this, in that I've mentioned this before, but the city kind of providing leadership on a parking district for Assembly Square. To say that, and Justin, I do not mean to throw you under the bus at all, but to say that parking is, the number one contributor to, traffic in that area, yes, and you have a green line that runs usually, but not all the time. You have buses. I'm a huge cyclist. I'm not sure that I would really access it by cycling. The area is not yet at a point where you can have multiple modes of transportation and to get there on a regular basis. So stepping back again from the city's perspective and to say, what is the parking for the whole situation, and what levers at the municipal level can we pull so we're not putting one particular developer in a tight spot or not? Because I'm worried about whether or not this project can pencil. I'm worried about being able to fill it. I mean, it's so from this perspective, and I've briefed so many planning boards. I love this experience, but here we have a whole project, a whole developer team coming, and I am worried about their ability to fill it, to get it to pencil, completely understand their concerns around Sunset. And now we're in a strange economic time. Nobody knows what's going to come. So, the city, I talked to Dan Bartman a little bit about this, really suggests that we think comprehensively about how parking in Assembly Square can be managed. Is it a parking district? Is it something else? And let's get ahead of that for the next development. And so we're not having this back and forth. And again, I would strongly suggest to the city, as we think about if we want developers to come into Somerville to help achieve Somerville Vision 2040, let's provide some predictability for them, so we don't have sunset clauses. And I'm a little shocked to hear that there's it takes 2 years to kind of get through this whole process. I'm like, that's a lot of resources, again, for the developer team that we would rather have put into infrastructure improvements, just as a for example. So Mr. Chair, you asked for kind of brush thoughts. I mostly directed to the city. I do think it's a good project, and agree with you that we shouldn't kind of get into a conversation at this project around 50 spaces, which very well may be addressed in the next development. And then as mobility looks more comprehensively about the range of transportation modes that serve this area, that too may not be an issue in the future. So less of a question to specific people and more of a long comment, but everyone else was commenting, so.
Lynn, that's okay. That's part of the benefit of being on the board. You get to make comments and, you know, when you want to. Who else? Has anybody not weighed in? I think everybody's weighed in. With that in mind, and Justin, I appreciate you being present and answering some of our questions and being the recipient of some of our comments. So don't think that we're beating up on you for any particular reason. I think you know, Lynn and I and other members of the board share the desire really to have a comprehensive and a fulsome view of what the heck we're going to be doing in this neighborhood, and we haven't seen it yet. So in the absence of that, you know, we need to make an action. And I think the action right now, based on what I view as the consensus of the board, is to move forward with this project. So with that in mind, does anybody else have anything else they would like to add, either on the board side or the city side or the applicant side before we move ahead? Seeing none, we do have two different votes that we need to make.
Mr. Chair, can I just?
Yep.
I just want to make sure, what I think it's clear what we've offered in terms of height. What we've agreed to, because I have to make sure last thing I want is a disconnect post meeting. We've offered to have 835 spaces with 100 valet. That's the original was 738 and 197. We've agreed that no one building can use more than 0.7, right? So the first building can't go crazy with parking. That's that, and we're amenable to that. And last thing I want to do is have to come back for a condition meeting. Other than that, all the other conditions we've agreed to. And I mentioned the phasing piece, which I think we're in alignment with Dan and Mr. Carey. So sorry about that.
No problem at all. Actually, before we move forward, Steve, can I have you unmuted? I know I just want to make sure that the conditions that we're going to be looking at this evening are in alignment with what's been discussed tonight.
Yep. So this is the memo, the most recent memo dated February 28th. Conditions 28 and 29 are mobilities conditions relative to the 0.7 ratio for both phase 1 and building 1 and phase 2 and building 2. We don't have any condition in that's the condition we have in there right now relative to parking numbers. We don't have any conditions in there relative to a total number of spaces. And then I believe just in your motion, if this is how the board does want to go with regard to the sunset date, it would just be striking that condition 30, which is relative to the sunset.
It is my understanding of the will of the board that the sunset provision will be stricken. I don't think that makes sense. That's novel to this board in my experience, and I think it makes it not something that the applicant is going to be able to reasonably comply with in the full build out of this project.
And Mr. Chair, for you, that sounds right. I do want to make sure the 835 is included. It's that I just think that that's a hard number that both the city and we can rely on. And again, I'm happy to say that no one building goes over the 0.7. So there's not an opportunity to run amok if the project goes slower than expected.
That in mind, the board will take two votes. One is on the master plan special permit, and the next is going to be on the special permit. So for the first, ZP 24-00046, which is the master plan special permit, following public testimony, review of the submitted materials, and deliberation of the required considerations outlined by the ordinance, I move to approve with the conditions as amended this evening. The master plan special permit for a master plan in the Assembly Square mixed use district with the recommended conditions as listed in the staff memo dated February 28th, 2025, and amended this evening. Seconded by Amelia. Steve, can I please have a roll call?
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
I'm gonna abstain.
Lynn Richards,
Aye.
Amelia Aba,
Aye.
and Michael Capuano.
Aye. Motion passes. Next is going to be ZP 24-00085,
Mr.
the
Chair?
special permit. Yes,
You skipped me.
Oh, shoot, I'm so sorry, Luke. Luke Schuster.
Aye.
there we go. Passes unanimously.
Mr. Chair, can I just
ZP
say, can I say thank you if I write a book which no one would read except for my mother, maybe, and she already knows what's in it. This would be a chapter. You guys have been patient, and we've done our best, and I've learned a lot about each of you and what your vision, and want to thank city staff for going back a long time for all their input. But seriously, thank you and really pleased to get this
Thank you.
resolved tonight. Thank you.
You have one more vote coming.
Oh, Jesus. You mean the design review? Or tonight?
Special permit. Special
Oh,
permit.
I'm sorry. All right. I'm gonna mute myself.
Your mother only read half a book. ZP 00085, special permit for waivers. Following public testimony, review of the submitted materials and deliberation of the considerations outlined by the zoning ordinance. I move to approve with the conditions in the staff memorandum and as amended this evening, the special permit for one, waivers for dimensional standards for building height, floor area ratio, and front setback. Two, proposed occupancy of commercial space greater than 10,000 square feet in leasable floor area in the Assembly Square mixed use district. And three, proposed modifications to the provisions of section 11.2 motor vehicle parking as amended in the staff memorandum and discussed in the meeting this evening, seconded by Amelia. Steve, can I please have a roll call of all of the damn members of the planning board this time?
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
I'm gonna abstain.
Lynn Richards,
Aye.
Luke Schuster,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Aye.
and Michael Capuano.
Aye. Okay. You'll write that book, Anthony.
Thank you very much. It's nice to get this passed. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you all very much. Congratulations. Good luck.
Good night.
What I'd like to do right now is just take a brief 5-minute recess. Jahan needs to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I be excused for non-planning board business? Thank you all.
Can we please not cut the Department of Education, my man?
I would hope that's
Sorry,
the case.
that's already been pulled as far as the last news report I have, but good luck in your meeting.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a good night, all. Thank you.
Good night. With Jahan needing to excuse himself for a different work-related meeting, I would just like to put us in a recess for 5 minutes and reconvene at 7:10. Okay. Okay. Planning board's in brief recess.
Can you scarf down dinner in 5 minutes?
No, I've got soup right over there. There's actually a really great place that we get some frozen soup and can reheat it on nights like this where I'm not exactly sure when we're gonna have a chance to eat. It's really good stuff.
Nice. Yeah.
Okay, so everybody who's gonna be back is now back. Do we have Steve?
Yes, we do.
Nice. All right. So at 7:12 p.m., I'm going to place the planning board back in regular business. We are now out of recess. For the record, I'm Mike Capuano. We've got Amelia Aboff. We've also got Michael McNeely, Lynn Richards, and Luke Schuster. We still have a quorum to be able to discuss matters of planning. The last item on our agenda is a continuation of a discussion that we began on public engagement and opportunities and questions as to if and how we should continue to expand our engagement with members of the public for testimony and other involvement. So, but to continue that, we had a nice beginning of the conversation last time and see where we're at right now to see if people have concrete ideas on how and if we should expand our official reach. I'm gonna call on Lynn because you had some thoughts on this. I'm hoping you might be able to share some of them.
Yeah, let me pull up some of my, hold on. So what I tried to do was to put together some information that other communities have used, right? And then I'm trying to pull it up so I can reference it. Community outreach practices. So you know, many times we have.
By the way, I'm sure you know, Lynn, the minute you share this screen, it becomes a public record. So just make sure there's nothing on there that you don't want
Oh, I wasn't.
the Commonwealth to know.
I wasn't gonna share it. Unless you want to share it. I was just referencing it for my own edification. I have a killer headache at the moment. So there's the way that I started thinking about it when we had this conversation is that we engage in at least two different roles. Number one is that we're responding to developer projects. And by and large, there's not, you know, we're really relying on the project team to be doing a lot of the community outreach, right? The other is when the city is doing something like a comprehensive plan, a neighborhood plan, significant zoning changes. So I thought about this in two buckets, right? So going with a smaller bucket first, you know, it's a developer-led project. What can we do? And Michael, you were talking about this last time. What can we do as a planning board that can help facilitate the public to engage on something that the developer project? And you know, the real kind of piece that I think that we can add to what is already occurring is putting out public notices or posters in the neighborhood in which the project is occurring. So, you know, for example, we voted on something in Davis Square last meeting, and, you know, you had H Mart Diesel Cafe right there, When Pigs Fly, and the library. So planning staff could have printed off like 5 or 6 different posters, stapled them around so the neighborhood can understand what is happening in that neighborhood. We're going to, you know, Assembly Square, again, 10 Hills, the Assembly Square area, that there's that kind of engagement. So there is something that the city can do to kind of encourage more engagement around project specific. Again, you're really relying on the developer to do the bulk of the outreach. when it's something that the city is leading, like the comprehensive plans or the zoning plans, that's where I see that there's a lot of opportunity for kind of evolution for the city, right? So I think of the different things that other communities have done. You've got, of course, posters and notices in different neighborhood gathering spots. You have a web page where people can come in and leave a virtual sticky note around it, because a lot of what we're doing is visual. So instead of receiving, 10 pages in text, you get 5 or 6 different sticky notes around a proposed plan. That there can be a staff booth at neighborhood events. I live in Davis Square, and there's, always they're closing off the street and having various events, there. I'm sure there's other neighborhoods, what's going on with Porch Fest. There's different ways that the city can engage. And then the biggest piece that I see is for the city to partner with neighborhood partners, right? So there's, again, I live in Davis Square. There's this big development that's being proposed. Could the city partner with the owners of the burn, just as a for example, and these partners actually do the bulk of the engagement around their constituents and their audience. The city may or may not be there as someone who has expertise in the particular area of what the comprehensive planning comprehensive plan allows, but yet the community members are expert in their neighborhood, and the city might bring a certain expertise. And that's the piece that I see. We talked about it, Amelia, you raised it really well in our last conversation around the 10 Hills neighborhood, for the city to kind of leverage partnerships with specific audiences. Anyway, so that's kind of where I began to think about how we might be able to evolve beyond, Michael, your good ideas of social media and kind of what we already do. What are some, and Somerville's a small city. So let's be clear, we're at 80,000, 81,000. We're not 250,000 with an unlimited budget. So I didn't want to think about everything that is being done, but those things that are kind of low cost and within the realm of kind of possibility. So I put those out there as ideas only, and you all can do with it what you want.
I appreciate it. I have some thoughts, but I also see Amelia's hand, so I'd like to recognize Amelia first.
Thank you for that. I think a lot of that's very well taken. I was thinking about this and coming at it from a different angle, and I think that your lens and my lens might sort of speak to two different problems to try to solve. I think yours was speaking to how can we get a broader cross-section of folks aware of and thus potentially engaged with projects.
Yes.
And I was coming at it from a place of, if someone was trying to find information, how can we make that information, how can we facilitate that information being more clear? And so I had been thinking about a couple different things that I think fall into the latter category. Which I'd like to talk about at some point, but I think that where this started was more to the point of engaging people who aren't currently engaged, as opposed to creating clearer information for people who are seeking it out. And those are both valid goals, but I think yours is more the spirit of where the conversation started.
So my thoughts, Lynn, are a couple of fold. So one, I start from the place of I welcome public engagement to the maximum extent that we can get. I love hearing where the public's at. I love hearing where neighborhoods are at, because that to me always informs how I view projects, view plans, and things like that. Particularly neighborhoods, where I don't live. So I love getting public testimony. I love getting folks speaking their mind, and I want to foster that to the maximum extent that we can. I have one slight concern with one of the proposals is to task staff with doing more than what they're already doing with doing things like flyering and postering, only because we're understaffed, and we're under-resourced, and to ask them to do additional outreach on this, I think is not necessarily a great use of the time, the limited time that they have that we pay them for. So I'm a little bit hesitant to say yes, we should make staff do X, Y, and Z. No, I don't think you like meant it that way. But it's like I want to be respectful of the fact that, you know, people have jobs, people have salaries, they're paid a certain amount of money to do the job, and that extends to beyond sometimes normal business hours. We're now winding up at 7:22 p.m. on a Thursday, which I think is now past the official, you know, close of business in the city of Somerville, and Steve is still with us. So that's kind of part one, is I'm a little bit skeptical about placing some burden on city staff that the resources might not be able to absorb. Two, and this might get me in a little bit of trouble. We have elected officials, 11 of them. We're all paid $40,000 a year to do this exact damn thing. Is to do neighborhood research and outreach, rather, on projects that impact particular neighborhoods. And I grew up expecting that my elected officials would do that. If you want me to vote for you, you're going to engage me in the discussion that you are having as a representative of the city. And I think representatives who don't engage in that type of outreach should be judged accordingly. So to be able to place what I consider to be the responsibility of our elected officials on non-elected officials who make, you know, a couple of bucks a month, to do, I think is shifting the burden on the folks that actually should be doing this work, on that specific work. I don't know if we can work collaboratively with our elected officials to make sure that they know kind of what we're handling, because I don't know if our you know, ward and at-large councilors are on board with everything that's coming before the planning board at a given point. But maybe there is a way to have a dialogue between you know, us, me as chair or whatever, and Steve, a liaison, and the councilors, be able to say, here's what's going to happen in, you know, the next meeting. These are the wards that are going to be impacted. Have you had an opportunity to discuss it with your constituents, the people who vote for you, the people who make sure that you have a job? Because we'd love to be able to discuss it with them, and it's your job as the, you know, ward alderman to be able to talk to people about that. So that's kind of how I see the division of work. When it comes to specific public outreach, when it comes to specific projects, is it should be the people that are getting elected to do that job, instead of the people who are basically doing this as on a volunteer level. So I'm a little bit skeptical of the idea that we should be taking on substantially more work, where that work is pretty much the role of people who are elected to do that job. But yeah, really.
If I can just add to that for a little bit of context for Lynn as a returner to Somerville, it's my experience as a member of this board that we've also had a lot of difficulty engaging the city councilors in what I would consider, frankly, even the most basic tasks that are their responsibility as councilors as it relates to city planning. So there are multiple neighborhood plans that I believe have sort of stalled out, in part due to the I'm not sure if it's unwillingness or inability or time commitment or what have you, but the sort of lack of participation from the relevant city councilor. And so I think that the question of how we can better engage them would serve both sort of outreach and also potentially serve some of the planning processes that have gotten a little bit stuck in the mud.
That's a really good point, Michael. Thank you. And Amelia for bringing up, staff resources, etc. My one, and I won't get you started on ward council people not doing what they're supposed to. As a constituent, I reached out as a new resident and still haven't heard back, and that was about 6 or 7 months ago. But I digress. My one concern, and this isn't for every single project, but if there was going to be a major effort on coming up with a neighborhood plan, for example, and that's city led, I would want to see kind of engagement beyond just the political structure, right? Because the alderman may very well, or alderperson may very well have a particular perspective, and so breaking out of that and really trying to partner with like constituent groups in that neighborhood to ask them to host something. I know Watertown, for example, the city of Watertown, when they kicked off their comprehensive planning process, because they're redesigning their downtown, their central square, started with kitchen table conversations. That a bunch of residents raised their hands and said that they would host a kitchen table conversation, and 3 or 4 people came in, and so you're able to have a lot of conversations with a lot of different residents. And so it's a yes, and absolutely we don't want to put more on staff. There's already a lot going on, but I do think that the more we can engage people, will also hit your point too, Amelia, that you brought up about creating areas, creating spaces where people have a better sense of where to find the information as well. So I think it's a 1-2. But thank you for pointing out how overworked Steve and his colleagues are. I really appreciate it. And these are just not suggestions, just ideas. That there's a difference. None of these are hills that I'm going to die on.
As a fan of sketch comedy, I appreciate the yes and. No, I think these are really good beginnings of how we can figure out the best way to do it. I'll say this: if there's something that's going on in my neighborhood or in West Somerville, I think it's a great idea for me as a member of the board, in collaboration with the ward councilor, if they would like, to have a meeting, to invite all of you. This doesn't have to be a planning board meeting for the purpose of an open meeting. This could be a listening session. So I don't mind the idea of doing something like that quite a bit. I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
I don't think this is something that we necessarily could or maybe should codify, but I wonder if in the realm of creating a small amount, but hopefully only a very small amount of extra work for Steve's team, I know that the applicants, for major projects, applicants meet with staff a number of times before they make it to the planning board stage, typically, right? Do we right now, the public notice process that's required of them doesn't include, to the best of my memory, anything that's like flyering at local businesses. And I don't know if it was appropriate to require that, but could we give them a strong verbal encouragement that like, hey, you're proposing this project and it's really close to Ola's and also this taqueria. Like, why don't you put this notice there too? And like they may or may not, but to the extent that we can leverage staff without creating additional work to create a small amount of additional legwork for the applicant teams, they may or may not follow through, but as an interim step, that might be something that we could consider. Steve, how much will they hate us for that?
No, I mean, right now we have noticing requirements for neighborhood meetings are, I think, spelled out in Article 15. You do have to, you get in a butters list. It's sort of like a public notice for a hearing for a neighborhood meeting, which is often the very first step on your, on your way to a site plan approval. You do have to get a list of abutters within 300 feet. You do have to start distributing the notice 2 weeks before that. A poster has to be published on the city calendar, city webpage 1 week before. I do think there is probably some, using that sort of structure of what we do have codified. I think there probably is, something we could do there where using that as a jumping off point to make sure that it's not just abutters within 300 feet, but if there's a significant community gathering space, whether that's like Lindell's Bakery or a school or, what have you, or, the Armory on Highland, whatever it is, making sure that not just mailing to those addresses, but actually, making sure that there's some sort of physical posting there. I think there's avenues to explore there that I don't think would be, as long as staff isn't tasked with actually physically going out to sites and flyering. I think short of that, I think there is definitely opportunities there for staff to make sure and ask for, some sort of confirmation from applicants that not only did they mail to abutters within 300 feet, but also, posted on, significant locations like in Davis Square, like Lynn was talking about.
That's even a step beyond what I was thinking, because I was at let's encourage this behavior. So if there, anything from encourage on up might be a way to start getting at that potentially.
So I'm going to spitball right now based on literally what I'm looking at right now. We have 3 people who are listed as attendees, members of the public, at this meeting. And I think it would be beneficial, maybe not tonight, but certainly very, very soon, to get some input from members of the public, particularly those who, tend to be aware of our meetings and testify at our meetings. How members of the actual public think it might work for us to outreach to them, and what type of outreach they'd like to see that we might be able to accommodate. So what I'd like to propose, Steve and members, is as an item of other business at some point going forward, to have a formal item on our agenda to outreach to members of the public, to have a public meeting, not a public hearing, on thoughts that people might have on how would you like to be reached out to, and what type of engagement do you think would be helpful from the planning board, from staff, from your ward or at large counselor. How do you think would be beneficial to be reached for engagement on things that matter to you, and such that you can participate in our meetings? Because just because I look at the agendas because I'm a nerd, and there are other people that are always engaged in our meetings and always provide testimony. All of that is very helpful and very welcome, and I love it. There are always people that might not know how to engage, might not know when, might not know how, and we're all sitting here as fully engaged members of the public who are on this board and doing a job. That's great. We are the best educated people in the city on how to engage in this process. That doesn't mean everybody else is. So I'd really like to be able to solicit from maybe members of the public their thoughts on how we can do our jobs better. I think that might also be very worthwhile to hear. And did I see or be aware of Michael wanted to speak?
Sure. Mr. Chair, first off,
Because man, this is just us yapping at each other. Jump in anytime you want.
yeah, I think your suggestion's a really good one. I think, getting the public to explain to us how we can best engage them is a brilliant idea. I think that's a no-brainer. So, very supportive of that. I wanted to touch on a couple other thoughts that came up earlier. So, Lynn talked about, the Burren potentially being an epicenter in Davis Square and how they could help facilitate some of these discussions. And we also highlighted that our elected officials can serve that role as well. I'm going to sidestep that particular topic for now and just kind of live with what I have personally experienced. Because Lynn, you're not being singled out. They're not just ignoring you. I've lived in multiple wards in Somerville, and I also haven't necessarily received that feedback. I have, however, felt that neighborhood associations have actually been really engaging. I've seen that both from a just personal level, but also when projects have been coming to the neighborhood, I've seen more than once, both Union Square and Gilman, just because those are the two I've been most adjacent to. I've seen them be really adamant in making sure that they're pulling in neighbors around particular projects that are coming through either, the city council, the planning board, ZBA, you name it. And so I actually wonder if this group wouldn't, and if staff wouldn't also be willing to find a way to engage those groups as a part of the process as well, right? Like either making sure that they're formally notified via email, as part of the process, and this could be either staff doing it or the applicant. I don't really know whose responsibility it would be, but I think those neighborhood associations and finding a way to embolden them and make them a more strong presence is valuable to us, I think, because they historically seem to just have this infinite capacity to want to engage, and I think grabbing that and adding it to our process is a good thing.
Michael, that's an awesome idea. Steve, can I ask what the logistics would look like to be able to? I mean, obviously we meet virtually. I would love to be able to invite representatives from formal neighborhood groups. Like Davis Square has one, Union Square has one, and I'm sure there are others. I would love to be able to invite the leader of those groups or representative of those groups to the planning board for a matter of other business, to see how they'd like to be engaged with. Because you're right, Michael, we do hear from representatives of neighborhood groups all the time, as a reactive of things that are happening to the neighborhood and meetings that we're hearing. I would love to be able to know if they think that there are things that we could do better, that their representatives could do better with, and how they, as the representatives of their neighborhood or their community, can be involved in these processes. Yeah.
I don't want to sidetrack us with this, but I think that while we're discussing the role of the neighborhood councils, it's salient to bring up. So like putting my developer hat on, I will say that one of the challenges that I think is a really big hurdle in Somerville for a lot of development is the sort of bifurcated process or uncoordinated process of people negotiating community benefits agreements for projects of scale, and then in one forum, and then negotiating mitigation through the planning board through a special permit process or a master plan process in another. And it's something that I've seen come up again and again with applicants and in companies that I've done work for. And I don't think that's a reason at all to not engage them in this way. But I would say that if we're going to sort of open the door to talking about what their role should be vis-a-vis the planning board's processes, I would love to see if it's appropriate to have more of a conversation with staff or with the leadership of those groups about, like, I know it's intended that they be separate because the community benefits agreement is not supposed to impact what's going on the sort of physical planning side, but I don't know whether there's any degree of coordination or
I'm gonna be very hesitant to work any degree of the community benefits process in with a planning process, just because they have very separate. We do not have jurisdiction over them. They cannot weigh in on the way we view process. I'm not saying you're considering that we do. I'm just I'm reticent to take any step that might put us in a tenuous place.
I agree completely. I was thinking more about like there's clearly a step when developers for large projects are reaching out to these groups, right? And like what is the timeline? What is the timeline when the Union Square Neighborhood Council gets the first call about initiates the first call about a community benefits agreement vis-a-vis the timeline of when a project in Union Square comes to the board for the first time? Like, is there any way that we can improve the coordination process, which I think is something that I would put on the applicant? I hear you loud and clear, Mike, and I'm not suggesting that we try and fold that into our process at all. I just would love to get to a point where projects weren't coming to us when they were still sort of hung up on the community benefits agreement, because that tends to slow things down from our side, as I can see. But maybe I'm thinking of just a couple examples that aren't representative.
No, you're not wrong. You know, and what we've done is we haven't based our zoning decision and our planning decision on what a community benefits agreement looks like, because we can't. But I think where we do sit is we recognize that that is part of an applicant's engagement with the community that we don't want to step on by getting ahead of our skis before the neighborhood is collectively on board with an application. Whether that's a community benefits agreement, whether that's something else that we don't have jurisdiction over. So I want to think very carefully about how we might want to proceed with consideration of things that are outside of our jurisdiction. Because I recognize that there are a bunch of things that are outside our jurisdiction that also play into, you know, the planning process and how a project gets from, you know, zero to permanent. So I just want to keep all of that under consideration, but also, you know, with the due respect of where our jurisdiction begins and where it ends. And I don't know the best way to do that, but I respect where you're coming from. I do.
I absolutely agree and hear you. I just, as we think about like formally inviting them to come and discuss their participation in our process, I want to be mindful of the fact that that has to stay in its own silo, but also has some parallels with our process that are significant.
For sure. Oh, anybody else right now? Michael, yeah.
So I have two additional topics, and maybe one of them we might elect to table for a future meeting, but I'm going to bring them both up anyways and start drilling into one of them. So the one that I think we may or may not want to really dig into tonight, it might be something we want to bring up on a later topic, is related to planning of mobility related items. You know, we have these great neighborhood plans, and we focus a lot on how those plans can, you know, impact the neighborhood. But increasingly, as we look at, you know, more and more interesting forms of transportation, you know, integrating it with bikes, integrating it with shuttles, integrating, you know, parking hubs and things like that, I'm seeing a little bit of a gap in the process that we have and where we're able to kind of, you know, set a vision through our normal process. So just wanted to throw the discussion out there while we're talking about public engagement and maybe potentially altering some of our neighborhood processes in the long run, and wonder if there isn't another angle to mobility that could be looped into this as part of the discussion. So I'll first say that that was one thing on my mind, and would definitely encourage the group to reply either that really doesn't seem to be part of our scope, or yeah, let's take it up. The second item that I think I do want to drill into tonight was related around those core documents that we've talked about, right? So we've got, you know, summer vision, we've got individual neighborhood plans, and then we get drilling into like the actual like individual parcel through a developer or an applicant led process. And in the first two phases of those, you know, we often look at those documents as kind of our guidebook, right? We lean on those to help inform our decisions, our questions, things like that. And I increasingly, both as a member of the board and, you know, in some ways a member of the public, am confused about the freshness of some of those documents, and making sure that we're providing the right transparency around that. I recognize that you know, we do have limited resources, and so I don't want this effort to come off as putting pressure or pointing at staff and saying like, why isn't this stuff being done quick enough? But instead, what I would like to do is help us just understand where we are in the process, where some of these documents do get stalled. You know, Amelia talked a lot about the Assembly Square neighborhood document stalling, and, you know, us not necessarily calling attention to the fact that this needs to kind of be picked up and accelerated. And also just helping me as a member understand when these documents might be out of date enough to the point that some of the feedback that was in the neighborhood before, when the document was drafted, could be very different than the feedback that the neighborhood is providing today by way of public comments and things like that. Because when push comes to shove and I'm seeing, you know, opposing views from public engagement through an application and a more material planning document, you know, I start to wrestle. But when I notice that one document is over 10 years old and I'm getting direct feedback from several neighbors that's very different, you know, I start to lean a little bit into the public feedback zone. And so if there's a way for us to, and maybe this already exists too, by the way, feel free to point me to it, but if there's a way for us to do a little bit of a better job of identifying those materials in one central repository, talking a little bit about when they were last published and kind of what next steps are. I know, again, as a member, I would benefit quite a lot. And I think the public might also have a better understanding of how these documents do impact, you know, some of our decisions as well. So it's a little bit of a ramble, but I just wanted to kind of flag that as something that's been kind of in the back of my head when it comes to a lot of the public engagement.
I can just jump in for a sec. I have been speaking with Dan Bartman, and we do want to come to you guys with a sort of update on ongoing planning projects we have right now, and also we would love your input on how we prioritize planning projects going forward. Like we have some, you know, in the works, as you know, just based on what needs to be updated, you know, what we've gotten feedback on. So I think that would be a good opportunity to answer maybe some of your questions, Michael, in terms of what plans, may need to be updated and are sort of no longer as fresh as they once were, and also you know, what areas of the city have been neglected in terms of long range planning projects. So that is something I've been talking with Dan about coming to you guys, and it would be, you know, under another business item to give you that update date and solicit that input on, you know, where we're lacking in terms of you know, long range and neighborhood and area based plans.
Yeah, and I just want to reemphasize, this definitely is not a meant of like, hey, you guys haven't been keeping up with your work. That's absolutely not what I want to say here. You guys, you know, are working really hard. So I want to be clear about that.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, really.
Amelia, you're on mute.
Well, you are muted, sadly. You know, it's been 5 years. You can't get it together.
It's a huge embarrassment, I know. A couple just really minor things that I don't know that we need to go into, but what I want to mention is that I don't lose track of them. And, you know, they're all under the category of making it easier for people to find things if they know if someone's out, like, aware of a project and is out looking for it. Like, before this meeting was like just going on this, I was thinking, if I didn't know where to look for something, how would I approach it? And I think there are some steps that I have no idea when or how, like, the planning website gets updated, but these are for consideration for future topics. But like on the main PPZ website, there is no link to agendas or minutes for boards. There's a link to a description of the board members, which is years out of date, which includes a link to our agendas, but no minutes. You'd have to go to departments, planning board, to find the actual link for agendas and minutes. So like, if I were a resident who was aware of a project and was trying to find out more about it, I might have given up by that point. I'm not sure. So like, are these the sorts of tweaks that we can think about in whatever process city websites get updated, which I'm sure is a whole other can of worms? Is one, like, just making it a little bit more navigable if someone were to look for something. I don't know where, so I don't know. And the second is, this might fall under the category of creating extra work, or it might not. And Mike, I will also quite readily defer to you on sort of the legal side of this, but when we put out our agendas, instead of saying this developer proposes a master plan in the assembly use district for a special permit, but like, that's the legal notice. Should we consider putting a 1-sentence blurb after that says, this is for a 3-building complex totaling X square feet to be built in Assembly Square, or like something that if you are a reader who is not tracking all of those words necessarily, might give someone like a very high level synopsis of what the issue at hand is. I don't know if I don't want to muck with the legal notices. I know the legal notices are holy, so you feel free to override that, but just a thought.
Yeah, so two things that in brief response to what you just said. Your first item, you're right. The website stinks. I know what I'm looking for 99% of the time. I'm the chairman of this damn board. It takes me forever to find what I'm looking for. Okay. Like, this is, I feel like Donald Sutherland in Animal House. This is my job, people. It's very difficult. So I agree. I think this is a comprehensive discussion of how the city's website is arranged, because I don't know, is my application before 2015? Is it after 2015? I don't know. I just know where the freaking building is. That's what I care about. So we'll hopefully figure that out at some point. Part one. Part two, legal notices. Putting on my John McLaughlin, McLaughlin group hat, issue 2, legal notices. I love the idea of doing that. I do not know if that is something that we can do, because when I have my little one-on-ones with Steve every other week before the meeting, so they say, that's very nice. I don't know where this particular 1, 2, 3 5th Street is. Where's the project? What are they looking to do? Tell me what we're talking about here. Because most people don't know what a building in a particular zone with these setbacks and these waivers look like. That is not public friendly. That's very nice if you know how a zoning ordinance works and you are a planning professional. I love the idea of having a human level synopsis of what the hell a project is. Somebody is planning to put a 4-story building at the bottom of my street. Okay, now I know what this is, right? Maybe I didn't go to the community meeting. Maybe I didn't know about the community meeting. because there wasn't sufficient outreach, going back to where we began from. I think that's a great idea. I would love to get some formal advice, Steve, on
Sure.
whether that's something that we can consider doing, because I think
Yeah.
that makes public participation at least more aware of what the heck we're talking about.
Yeah, no, agreed. I know there are certain components of a legal notice, that come from MGL with regards to like
Yep.
describing the project. I think
All of that needs to be in there.
I think the zoning
Do
district
not
has to be in
violate the
there.
statute.
Yeah, right. But there probably is, more wiggle room there to make it more plain language.
Yeah.
I'm
And
not
if the-
Let's think about doing that.
existing language plainer. I'm suggesting we keep the existing language because thought has been given to the structure of it and add an italics under it. What it
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's definitely doable and I think a good idea. Yeah.
Because I don't think that adds much, if any, work to you or whoever's creating the legal notice of the agenda.
Mm.
Because you and I talk about it all the time. What the heck is this building? Yeah. And what are they looking to do? That's nice that they're seeking waivers from section 2.2.5 to 0.8. It's like nobody cares. We care because it's legal, but let's talk about they're required to put in 400 spaces. They're proposing 2. That's helpful.
Mike, just one other small thought on this thread.
Yeah.
It may just be easy enough, like you said, for Steve and others in planning staff to just write up those little blurbs because it's so internalized from your knowledge of the project anyway. But this is the kind of thing that this is genuinely a tough moment to be raising this kind of government efficiency idea. But like this is the kind of thing that AI is really good at summarizing in simple ways. And if you run it through an AI thing and then staff just reviews that summary to make sure it doesn't make a mistake, if it's doing it off of your own content, I have in my practice found that to be actually a really useful application of it.
I will defer to staff on how they think it's going to be most appropriate, but that's not a bad idea. I've already
I
started
had
to
not
dabble
I
into
have
the Chat GPT to plan a trip that I'm taking, and it's really freaky.
Yeah, no, I have not personally really worked with AI much, but yeah, I mean, I do think that that could potentially work to make sure that, as we're going over a proposal that we're not leaving out some pertinent, piece of information that people would want. But I do think honestly, by the time we're writing a legal notice for a project, especially if it's a site plan approval and it's already gone to a neighborhood meeting, design review, another neighborhood meeting, we as the case planner could write a plain language in italics description of what it is, no problem.
As we think about this idea, I certainly defer to you and the rest of planning staff on sort of what would make sense, but I just want to clarify that to the extent I was dreaming this up, I was thinking of it as like a 1 sentence, the most basic possible.
Yeah.
This is a building of this, what's being proposed is a project of X size in X neighborhood. Because I think if we start trying to include a lot of detail, the way that I see this running amok of legal notices is like including or excluding information that then could be argued to be misleading about the project.
Right.
I'm thinking that the way to do this without causing trouble is to have it be like the most basic possible description and very little else. But I think we've turned that into Dan and the solicitor's problem, maybe. So
Yeah, and I think yeah, that was something I did want to say earlier, that I think that is why we often do get really sort of simple is sometimes in our legal notices, or just like we'll just say like a project is modifying a building, because if we get too descriptive of what they're doing and then they don't do that thing, then we've incorrectly noticed it. But I'm just trying to think now, I mean, beyond the sort of avenues, the channels through which a legal notice has to go out, I do think there's probably there must be another avenue that sort of plainer description of the project can be readily accessible to people. And I'm just trying to think of the avenue by which that's available, where if you get this legal notice and you don't know what something is, you don't know what that is because it's a bunch of legal jargon. If you're trying to very quickly find out what that project is, sort of where you go next, I guess it would be reports and decisions, because that's usually that's the web page that's linked in the legal notice. But anyway, this is just good food for thought for how we get to the people who need to know a sort of most straightforward description of the project that's going to be impacting their neighborhood. So anyway, I'm just thinking out loud.
I get that, Stephen. Then we just talked about the deficiency of the reports and decisions page.
Right. No, and that has been deficient since I started with the city. It's really not very accessible.
No.
And that is something I'm glad you're bringing up, because I will bring it up. It's been brought up before. That's just not great, the way the links are listed, how you find a project. It's just not great. So I think I'm glad you're bringing it up, because that'll prompt me to bring it up at another staff meeting.
We're going a little over, I think, what I anticipated the discussion to be tonight, but I'm just going to raise one other thing. There used to be a website. I am sorry, I hit my earphone and started hitting with some Kendrick Lamar in my ear. I'm not mad, but just not the appropriate time. There used to be a website, and I don't know if it was a city-run website or something else, but you used to be able to it was basically an overlay with like Google Maps. You could focus in on a particular area of the city, right? And see what projects were in development, what projects were proposed to, be presented, what projects had been completed recently. And I don't know if that's something that we might be able to. I haven't been able to find that website in a long time. I don't know if that was somebody's pet project or if that was an actual city website, but
I'm not aware of it, but
a member of the public, I thought it was super helpful.
Yeah, no, I'm not familiar with it, but I have heard of that idea before. I'm sure there's a city out there that has implemented something like that, where it's like you just pull up a GIS map and it just has points for like all projects before the planning board right now, and it just like allows you to quickly do. I know that exists. And yeah,
if we don't have that, that's probably going to be a pretty big procurement, man. I'm sorry.
Well, yes and no. I would think we have a lot of GIS data. Sorry, go ahead, Amelia.
It's pretty easy to do. I've had staff that would have pulled something like that together in about 10 minutes. Like there's just you put in the addresses and it's geolocated on a Google map, and boom, it's done. It's pretty straightforward. I'm not saying that I know how to do it. I don't. But it's not a pretty big procurement. If you find the right person, my guess is that it would take them half an hour.
I was just joking, can we find some urban planning graduate students who want a project to do? Because I feel like it's also a build it once and then it's easy to update, as opposed to
that's some class credit stuff. That's not even.
I don't know, Steve. Do you want an intern? Can we find you an intern?
I think actually internally, I think something that came up recently was like,
you used to have them.
Hey, do we have any intern tasks that we, if we were to. So this is I'm actually adding it to a staff meeting agenda right now, just to make sure that the discussion comes up. So yeah, no, appreciate it.
Well, I'm teaching at Harvard, their planning studio, and I've got a bunch of students who are quite grateful with some help that I'm giving them. So I could ask them to do that one task again. It's that they're of that generation. Here, Lynn, this wasn't all that hard.
Good. Let's see if we can get one of them. Anybody else have anything they would like to raise for the good of the meeting at 8:06 p.m. on the Thursday before the Big East tournament, and many others? Seeing none, I'm going to ask that this discussion point be continued to future meetings, Steve, because I think it's really helpful. I think we have some outstanding questions that we, like some feedback on, both on legality and feasibility. Because I love the idea of engaging more people. And the question is, what is the best way to do it? So awesome. Thank you all very much. Yeah, Amelia.
I just want to say thank you to Luke and Michael for bringing this up. I think this was a great outcome of the conversation we had at the beginning of the year. And thank you, Lynn, for brainstorming your best practices list for us.
Yeah,
Mike, you're up.
I was gonna say, yeah, this is, really glad to have this conversation. That this sort of like public engagement stuff is things we as staff obviously do want to be getting better at, and it's very helpful to have a conversation like this that like really crystallizes the things and sort of that we could be doing. So anyway, just want to say I appreciate it.
Nothing else before the planning board. 8:08 p.m. The chair moves to, actually, before we do that, just clarity for the record, the next meeting will be on the 20th of March, which will also incorporate a joint hearing with the land use committee. I will be absent. I'm taking a little bit of vacation during that period of time, so I'll be out of town. But Amelia is awesome and will be able to definitely maneuver that aspect of the meeting. So yeah.
I was just gonna say, I do anticipate that could be a later, longer meeting than usual. Just because we have a number of sort of interrelated zoning amendments. And I know there'll be a lot of public comments. So I just wanted to put that on your radar that could be a longer one.
Cameras off. Nothing else at 8:09. The chair moves to adjourn, seconded by Amelia. Steve, can we have a roll call?
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Lynn Richards,
Aye.
Luke Schuster,
Hi.
Amelia Aboff.
Aye.
And Michael Capuano.
Aye. Thank you all very much. I'll see you in a little bit.
Everybody.
Thanks.
Good night.
I know.
Aye.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks all.